Throughout the 19th century, Tsarist Russia and Imperial Britain waged a Cold War for influence in Afghanistan. It came to be known as the Great Game, a phrase made famous by Rudyard Kipling in his novel Kim. Today, some of the players have changed, but Afghanistan remains the focus of competing interests in the region. India, Pakistan, China, Russia and the US have high-stakes investments in the next government in Kabul. So how could this shape Afghanistan's domestic and foreign policy? Well, with me here in the studio is Peter Galbraith, who served as the first US ambassador to Croatia. In 2009, he was appointed UN Deputy Special Representative for Afghanistan, but was fired after saying the UN was not doing enough to combat fraud in the 2009 Afghan election. Also with us, Omar, who is Afghanistan's ambassador to France and Canada. He's also the former spokesperson for Afghanistan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for joining us. Ambassador Galbraith, let me start with you, and let's go back to the 2009 election. You were very critical of that election. In fact, you called it a train wreck. And just this past weekend, you said that you had concerns that this year's election will not be any less cleaner. Do you still have those concerns?
I think there's some very positive signs about this election. The turnout was very substantially larger than it had been in 2009. The reports so far of irregularities are not on the scale we heard in 2009. In 2009, evening of the election, it was obvious there had been massive fraud because there were big totals reported from places where we knew there'd been very little turnout. Now, I haven't seen that yet. It may still emerge. There may still occur results from ghost polling stations, the ones that exist on paper but didn't exist in reality, where you could report big results, but we haven't seen that yet.
Right.
And I think one of the major reasons for the difference is that in 2009, Karzai, the incumbent, was the candidate for re-election. He appointed all the members of the Election Commission, and everybody had an incentive to try and rig the election in his favor because he was going to time there isn't an incumbent.
He did appoint all the Election Commission members for this election as well. I want to get to that in a moment, but let's go to Ambassador Samad. What did you make of the conduct of this election?
Well, as an Afghan, I'm very much impressed. I saw this coming over the last few weeks. There's been momentous interest and enthusiasm by the people, by the candidates, in the rallies, by the media. It was very obvious that something was building up. And on Saturday, we saw the result, major turnout, a message of defiance by the Afghan people, men and women, across the board. And, you know, if you look at all ethnic groups, all regions of the country, the turnout was much larger, at least twice as large as the 2009 election. And this is very good news because it sends some very key messages to the Taliban and their backers, to the Afghan government of the outgoing President Karzai, and to the rest of the world, that Afghanistan can be on the right track if people take charge of their own destiny.
Although there were problems. I mean, there were hundreds of polling stations that didn't open, and in polling stations that did open, they ran out of ballot papers.
The problems were unfortunate, of course, but we had more stations and polling centers open this time than anticipated. Almost 1,000 polling centers out of 7,300 or so were closed, which is much better than what we anticipated 2-3 months ago. The Taliban were unable to carry out the attacks that they wanted to on election day. Our intelligence services today reported that almost 3,200 Taliban attempts at disrupting elections were failed on election day. Many of them were captured, others were killed, suicide bombers and so on and so forth. So I think overall that was a very good sign. Now, challenges do exist, right, especially from here on.
Okay. Ambassador Galbraith, you know, when we listen to these reports that are coming out of Afghanistan right now, and even when we listen to Ambassador Samad over there, it would seem that Afghanistan has suddenly reached its kumbaya moment when everyone decided to come together and go and vote in this election and bring democracy to the country. But one of the things we are finding out right now, as the results are starting to come in, is that people voted along ethnic lines. And I'm wondering, what is the potential for conflict, given that people voted along ethnic lines, once a winner is finally announced?
Well, the danger is there. The war in Afghanistan so far has essentially been a war among the Pashtun, because the Taliban is almost entirely Pashtun, and Karzai and the power brokers around him are Pashtun. So the danger would be if the Tajiks and Hazaras, the other, the second and third largest group in Afghanistan, feel that they were robbed in the election. I mean, they do have a sense that they were robbed in 2009, and they might have been. So if they feel they're robbed in this election, you know, then there's a danger of the breakdown of the country along ethnic lines. That is, between the Pashtuns and the Tajiks and Hazaras on the other side. And that would be, if it evolved into a civil war, it would be a much more serious affair. I think there are reasons to hope and think that may not happen, but that has been my concern.
Right, Ambassador Sommer, do you share those concerns?
I do and I don't, meaning that we have evolved. I think that what we're going to see out of this election, once results come out, is that many of the barriers that preconceived notions of ethnicity and regionalism and so on and so forth are going to crumble to some extent, and they're going to come down. These barriers will be broken. I think you're going to see a non-Pashtun, like half Pashtun like Abdullah, get a lot of votes from Pashtun areas. You're going to see a Pashtun like Ashraf Ghani get many votes from non-Pashtun areas. And you're going to see a new generation of Afghans. 70% of the population is under 30. They've experienced the last 13 years of development, playing a major role with new mindset, with something, you know, we're looking forward to change and reform. And I think that on that front, demographics will play a role, and we are going to see a new Afghanistan continuing to build up. But again, there will be ethnicity. Ethnicity will be an issue. Some power brokers are going to use religion and language and regionalism as an issue. But those things are now somewhat contained by the democratic process.
If I could add on this, I mean, both of these men who appear to be the men who will be in the runoff, that is to say Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, I know them. They really are true Democrats. And I think both of them realize that the system in Afghanistan, which is one of the most diverse countries in the world ethnically and geographically, where not only is all the power concentrated in Kabul, but in Kabul you have a very powerful president and a very weak parliament. That really that system needs reform with a system that allows genuine power sharing. So, you know, a president, but perhaps also a prime minister, where these different communities are represented. And if it evolves that way, I think that would be a healthy system that might accommodate both sides. So it isn't an election in which one group has won and the other group has lost.
From what you're saying, though, Ambassador Galbraith, it would appear then that Hamid Karzai has left the country in good shape.
No, but the country will be in better shape when he leaves.
I mean, the fact that we had an election that was largely free and fair, the fact that 7 million people took part, 1/3 of them being women, he must have had some role to play in that.
Well, I think the issue is that people were excited to have a choice for an alternative, but in reality, I think he's left the country much worse off since 2009. You know, in 2009, the entire international community, led by the brand new and very popular American President Barack Obama, were putting massive resources into Afghanistan. The number of international troops tripled. There was a huge surge of aid. But in order for that to work, the international community needed an Afghan partner. And in Karzai, they had somebody who was, you know, considered ineffective and corrupt. But then came the 2009 election, and he was also seen as illegitimate. That was a real turning point. That election undermined international support for Afghanistan. It undermined the support that many of the people of Afghanistan had for what was happening. So I would say that this election is, in fact, a rejection of Karzai and a sense of, among Afghans that they would like to have a new beginning.
I would say that Karzai has obviously played a somewhat controversial role over the last few years. But you do have to give him credit, whether it was under duress, under pressure, that he has brought the process forward to this point. But at the same time, we are still not out of the woods yet. The test is still to be determined. The result of the elections may take weeks and months before we know. And so whatever happens with the process between now and the end result is going to determine Karzai's legacy. If he allows for a somewhat free, credible, fair process to unfold, then he will be remembered as such. And if he plays and toys with it, then I think that will damage him, and it will damage Afghanistan and anyone and everyone else who has contributed to Afghanistan.
Okay, let's look at the response from the White House to the election. This was a statement released by President Obama, and he said, "On behalf of the American people, I congratulate the millions of Afghans who enthusiastically participated in today's historic elections, which promised to usher in the first democratic transfer of power in Afghanistan's history, and which represent another important milestone in Afghans taking full responsibility for their country." Ambassador Galbraith, relations between Hamid Karzai and President Obama have not been the greatest, and I'm putting that very mildly. Will they now improve?
Certainly. Karzai is a mercurial, very emotional person who I think enjoyed sticking the finger in the eye of the United States in spite of the important role that the U.S. had. He operated out of pique. And I think whether it's Abdullah or Ashraf Ghani, they're going to operate differently.
Let me stop you there. Why did he operate out of pique? Was something done to him? Was he insulted? Was there questions over his legitimacy?
He certainly felt it. He felt that the United States had wanted him gone in 2009, that the accusations of fraud, which of course had been committed on his behalf and perhaps at his instructions, that all of that was unfair. He took it very personally, and he responded in all sorts of ways. He accused the United States of eventually being behind the fraud. He said that the United States wasn't a partner, and most recently, really unbelievably, he had Afghanistan vote with Russia in favor of Russia's annexation of Crimea, when there are U.S. troops there and joining a handful of countries. It was really a very bizarre thing to do.
Okay, well, let's move on from Hamid Karzai to what is happening right now. One of the controversial issues in Afghanistan is what happens when troops start pulling out, and the force that remains. Of course, this security agreement will determine a lot of that. What will be the role of that force in Afghanistan?
Well, let me just say that Karzai abstained on Crimea when the vote was taken. But he did show some interest in trying to support the Russians on that. I think that one of the first things you're going to see a new government, a new leader do and consider immediately is to sign the bilateral security agreement with the United States, and then followed by the agreement with NATO. Why? Because the Afghan people have already spoken clearly that they are in favor. They feel that they need continued support. Support doesn't mean combat troops anymore. That is finished. That is going to end in 2014, at the end of 2014. But it does mean financial support, it does mean training, and it does mean mentoring and equipping. Without that, the Afghan National Security Forces, now totaling more than 350,000, may crumble over time. And that is what might cause a civil strife. So in order to prevent that from and avoid that from happening, I think that will happen, and it will be critical for Afghanistan's security and stability to do so.
Okay, Ambassador Galbraith, Ambassador Sommer, thanks for joining us here on The Heat.